And we're live.
Hi, Alexis.
Hello. How are you today, Rachel?
I'm quite well. I'm feeling very in my heart space right now about this topic we're going to talk about, which I'll get you to introduce in a second. But how are you going?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can feel that also. Perhaps it's relevant to today's topic. We're discussing chronic conditions. So whether you have a chronic condition or you know someone who does, we hope you find value in the empathy and, positioning yourself in the shoes of someone with a chronic condition. And there are certainly aspects that we can all relate to around, there's a lot to unpack. But I was interested to start in hearing your perspective on the value of labels, Rachel, because working in the mental health space, I can see a place for them, and yet I can see a place to let them go. So what are your thoughts?
Oh, that's such a great question. Yeah, this is really relevant to both you and I, both this issue of working with people with chronic conditions, because I know both of us do work with those sort of clientele. And yeah, it's a great question about the value of diagnostic labels. And it comes up in my work a lot, that question. And with my supervision of my early career colleagues. And I find myself saying the same thing these days, which is that a label, a diagnostic label, whether it's psychiatric or physical, is only useful if it helps us view ourselves more compassionately. So certainly in psychology, I have many times seen labels or diagnoses help people view themselves through a kinder, more compassionate lens. You know, if they realize they've got autism and they didn't know until now, or ADHD, or some other diagnosable condition that's been severely impacting their lives. Mm-hmm. It's like a relief. And I think it's similar for a lot of people with medical conditions. When you finally get that diagnosis, it can be a huge relief, because then it points your focus in the direction of treatment. And that should only ever be the purpose of a diagnosis, not to bring about shame or judgment, but to point our focus in the right direction with regards to our options. What do you think?
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. I like that, that awareness of being able to narrow my scope once I have a label, rather than having to look at absolutely everything. The other thing that comes to mind is the discussion that we had I think it was last week, on the drama triangle, and that to recognise ourselves in a particular position can help us to put language and understanding and see ourselves. And yet the over-identification, and I would say it's the same with labels, an over-identification with a label to the point that I can't let it go. I think that could be a real hindrance.
Exactly. I agree with that. I think it's part of me. It's one way of seeing myself. It's not me. It's not all of me.
Yeah. Yes.
And there's the language around this is really important. You know, I experience symptoms of depression is a very different statement to I am a depressive person. So language counts here, and the way we think about our condition and how we relate to it, and make sure we see it as not who we are, not defining us, but something that we kind of have to live with perhaps, and make friends with and accept and work with, which is what we're going to talk about, right?
Absolutely. Even the value of feedback from the body is something that I've learned is necessary for all of us, whether we have a chronic condition or not. All of us have this constant feedback in the form of sensation, and that has real value. You've taught me the value of sensation and giving me feedback around my emotions and my needs. And I think it's the same for our physical needs. The need for rest, the need for nutrition. They're all contained in the very sensation itself. So certainly I am really interested in shifting the avoidance kind of mentality, which interestingly I hadn't really connected the two before, but it's the very same thing that we do with emotional embracing, that we can do with our sensorial, our physical embracing.
Yeah, you're talking about the compassionate embracing process.
Yes, but specific to physical sensation.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really important. I once had a client who had a lot of problems with his spine. I'm sure you've had many of those clients as well. And he imagined his spine as these broken train tracks. And he had a very kind of adversarial relationship with his own spine. But what I got him to do was start visualizing the train tracks kind of coming together and green foliage growing around them. And he used this visualization to be kind to his spine. We worked a fair bit on, his relationship and attitude towards his own spine, because he was still very stuck in the stage of anger about his physical condition. And I could sense that his resentment and anger and frustration that he understandably felt about his issues with his spine were adding more tension and stress. So teaching him different ways to compassionately embrace or bring compassion to his experience, it didn't fix the world, of course. There's a reality to the body, but it did help to relax some of that, anger and resentment and bring more acceptance to his reality.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. I'd be interested in any conditions that our viewers might be experiencing, so that we can speak to you directly and give examples, specific examples.
Right. So if you're listening and you're willing to put in the comments a chronic condition, obviously don't feel you have to, but if you're willing to mention a chronic condition that you have lived with in the past or do live with now, please feel free to share, because when we say chronic condition, we mean anything that's sort of going on for some time that's interfering in some way or impacting your life. So it could be psychiatric, it could be medical, it could be because of an injury or something else.
As you're talking about the anger and the resentment, I'm really interested to have a look at the 5 stages of grieving again, because particularly when someone receives a diagnosis, and that can happen at any age of life, there is a process of coming to terms with that and the grief of the life that is not going to be, that I need to accept certain disability and certain limitations.
Yeah.
Which again, we can all relate to. Would you like to share those 5 stages with us, Rachel?
I would, but first of all, I'd like to acknowledge, Mia, thank you for sharing that you live with Ross River fever. I know of a couple of people who've gone through that, and I know how debilitating that can be. I think that those of us who don't live currently with a chronic condition of the body can easily slip into a false sense of control. I know I can. It's easy to get frustrated when we realize we have limitations and we realize we don't have control over, things in our lives, relationships, even our own mind and our own feelings can, take us by surprise. Those living with a chronic condition are facing, in a way that the rest of us are not, every day, usually, they're facing the limitations of the ego that wants to, and is quite functional in this way, wants to take charge, wants to plan, wants to control, wants to influence, wants to operate in the world. But the ego doesn't like reaching its limits, and the answer being, no, you can't do that. You don't have the physical capacity to do that. You don't have the energy to do that. I know you want to go to that party, but you can't. you know, I know we've all faced this with COVID at some point as well, that the disappointment that can kick in. But before the sadness and the disappointment, deep disappointment, the stages are normally, there is a sequence to it. Normally there is shock, disbelief, and some kind of denial early on. You know, we can't quite believe this is happening. We can't quite believe it's true. You know, and this is a normal experience because our brains are so complicated, and it does take time for the linkages to be made between the different parts of the brain, which when they happen is when we're starting to get closer to acceptance. But at first, our brain has not caught up. So we are in a kind of disbelief and shock and denial. And the evolutionary function of that is, in the shock state, we can go into survival mode. And that's actually a good thing in many ways, because we start looking outside of ourselves for options. It's like when somebody passes away and we think, right, where are the wills, organize the funeral, blah, 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 all the practical things. Often when we get a diagnosis, we go into, well, what are my options? Which treatments do I get? How do I deal with this? And that's obviously very wise to do in the beginning. However, at some stage, or not however, and at some stage, other emotions or our emotions will kick in once the shock has subsided, and anger might kick in. You know, this is not fair. We're hitting up against our limits now, and we can't have what we want. And the anger stage, you know, is an important one to acknowledge and honor and work through. The third stage of the traditional grieving model is bargaining, and that's more cognitive, like, why is this happening to me? If only I'd looked after myself better. If only I hadn't gone camping and got bitten by that mosquito and got Ross River fever. If only, if only, if only. That's another part of the grieving. And at some point, we sink into an important kind of hopelessness. It's a creative hopelessness where we give up on the idea that we have, you know, more control than we actually do. It's a healthy hopelessness because we start to accept the reality. We really start to grieve and feel sometimes a bit depressed, and that's okay. We start to feel really sad that, yes, this is how it is, and I have lost something here. Maybe there are many things I have lost. And we must let ourselves grieve that. I can't say enough about how important going into our sadness and grief is.
Yeah, I can very much relate to that. The need to go into the sadness and the grief, and it's quite a guttural experience. So there's recently been quite a lot of sadness and grief coming up for me, and I was wanting to move towards it to kind of complete it. You know, I was seeking that full resolution, and in looking for the word, in that moment, the word was gutted. I just felt really gutted, like my guts had just been emptied out of me, but it felt at least more complete than this semi kind of sadness, this semi kind of dipping in, but trying to keep myself buoyant, you know, and then dropping in every so often, but, you know, trying to cheer myself up. The resolution, the completeness of grief is somehow deeply satisfying. It's like a cleanse. It's like a full release.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important part of the recovery. Mia has mentioned the anxiety and the depression, the psychological struggles that go with living with it's not just physical. You know, a lot of medical doctors will forget the psychological, you know, they'll treat the medical. And a lot of my clients say it's the psychological and emotional elements of this condition that are actually more difficult than the physical. And so I agree with you, Mia. And so there can be some stigma that you receive, like a sense of, well, just live with it, suck it up. There is not this acknowledgement of the genuine grief, the genuine sense of being gutted, the genuine loss. And someone else mentioned, Elizabeth mentioned, the associated anxiety as well. And that is, when it comes to living with a chronic condition, from what I've read, they add the anxiety and fear and worry as another stage, because so much anxiety can come up about, will I have to live with this forever? What does my future look like? We can easily, understandably, catastrophize and start to predict the future, and it's all bad. And that can be overwhelming, that anxiety. And
that into something that that I wanted to raise, which I think is associated with the anxiety, and that is our need for contribution and competence that can be hindered when we're living with chronic illness.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the question people can ask themselves is, well, what is the fear? And that could very well be a significant fear.
That's right. Am I able to contribute? Which I think there's two aspects to it. There's an innate urge or an innate need to contribute, which I think is probably built on our biological need to belong to our families, to our communities, and that social acceptance that comes with it. But there is also a cultural expectation that, for a certain period of our lives, let's say leaving school until retirement, there is an expectation that we contribute. And I think if that's somehow compromised, we need to look deeply into where our sense of self-worth comes from. I know there was periods in my life, even, in the postnatal period, where I really struggled with, where's my worth come from when I'm not contributing economically. That was a very, very deep struggle. And, I even ended up asking myself the question, how would this be if I was disabled? If I was mentally and physically disabled, I could not contribute to my society. How would I have a sense of my own value and my own worth? And where I landed ultimately was that presence makes a difference, and that our worth lies in our presence.
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. A quick little story that I'll tell you, which touched my heart. My grandmother died about 10 years ago at the age of 95. And she had many shortcomings as a human being, but she was very gentle and sweet and loving. And she was lying completely incapacitated at the age of 94 or so in the bed. And she said, it's so sad for me, Rachel, because I can't even get up to make somebody a cup of tea when they come to visit me. And when she could still get up and pour somebody a cup of tea, she felt like she could contribute something. And I asked her a question about that, so how do you kind of deal with the fact that she couldn't even get out of bed by herself? And she said, well, I figure that I'm giving the people who work here a job. And if I, they've got employment because of me. And if I smile at them and say thank you, then that makes their day a bit brighter. And so even in her incapacitated state in the bed in the nursing home, she was still able to find a sense that she was giving something to somebody. I never forgot that little conversation, because she was able to reframe it, even in her state. And I've just posted in the comments for people a great article about Frida Kahlo, and it's called Exploring Frida Kahlo's Relationship to Her Own Body. And have a look at that article, because she lived with so many chronic conditions. She had such a tragic life from a medical and physical point of view. But most of us know Frida Kahlo's paintings. And she set herself up in bed and she painted, and she did self-portraits. She asked them to put a mirror on the ceiling so she could see herself in the mirror on the ceiling, and she would do self-portraits. She did dozens of self-portraits from the mirror on the ceiling. Yeah. And she had not wanted to be a painter. She'd wanted to be a doctor, but she had a bit of talent around painting. So she found a way to have some meaningful expression and creativity and fun while stuck in bed. And she's just, to me, the avatar of inspiration for somebody who lives with chronic conditions. And that's not to put pressure on anybody to, like learn 10 languages during lockdown or anything like that. But this idea that we can still work at finding meaning and purpose and contribution somehow, even with our chronic condition, and that if we have dark thoughts that, life, people would be better off without me, which some of my clients have expressed, the unrelenting nature of the pain or the depression, the thing I sometimes say to them is, if you took your own life, it really would be a waste of your talents, of your personality, of the things that you have to contribute to the world. And then we go looking for what those are, because we all have our signature strengths, every single one of us.
Yes, the meaning making. I love that you've brought that up, because that is what a creative practice helps us to do. Helps us to make sense of the experience, even though we may feel completely alone, that somehow we can connect some dots about, what experience does this bring up for me? How does this relate to my childhood experiences? What does this mean for me? How do I need to creatively adapt to allow for this to be here in my life? How does it impact my relationships, my career, and to be creative around it? So I feel strongly that a creative practice is essential, really, for anybody living with a chronic condition, for that very purpose. And that reminds me of what Joe has said here around that it's tiring to tell the story again and again.
It is. It's tiring.
Yes. And that I know some of the podcasts that you and I listen to, one of the practitioners talks about the value of sharing our story, and that if we can somehow just tell it even a little bit different, that we might have a different perspective on it, and that ultimately we're almost drying it up. We're drying up the story.
Wringing it out.
Bringing it out, yeah, so that it doesn't have the same emotional content, but there's value in telling the story again. It's a creative process. It's a narrative therapy in a way. And if I can just be aware of how I'm telling it, perhaps noticing, am I using the same words? Am I bored of this? Then maybe I need to go deeper with it, or shed a different light on it.
Well, maybe if I'm starting to get bored with my pain story, maybe I've come to a greater place of acceptance. It's the number one therapy, I was telling you before we started recording, the number one therapy for chronic pain and chronic conditions that we're advised to use currently is called acceptance and commitment therapy. The acceptance part is practicing profound acceptance, which we all know is one hell of a challenge, but to practice profound acceptance of that which we want to push away. We tend to do one of two things. We either ignore it and push it back into the shadows, we deny it, we want to get rid of it, or we let it control us and we indulge in self-pity and trying to use it to kind of tragically get our needs for attention and care met. But unfortunately, we're in a disempowered position where we are stuck in the hopelessness, in the victim mindset, in the sense of being out of control and lacking agency. These are the two things I see in my clinical practice, either complete denial or complete indulgence. And the third path, the middle path, is to face it. Hard to do, I know. Face it fully, be with it, stay with it, and accept it. And this is not just a thing that you've done and then you're done. This is like constant, right? Ongoing acceptance. Okay, I notice the resistance. I notice the indulgence. Now I'm going to go be with it here, now, be with it, stay with it. And in the process of acceptance, interestingly, something happens. We open up some more space inside of ourselves psychologically. And in that space, we can bring in meaning, connection, contribution, purposeful living. It's only under the conditions of more acceptance that we can commit, hence acceptance and commitment therapy, we can commit to living by our values a little bit more. I hope that makes sense, that summary.
That was quite deep, actually, Rachel, and reminds me, that of the value of getting quite granular with our experience, and the need, as you've said, to sit with it even mentally move towards it, come to know it at a very granular level. And that's such an interesting process, because there's both a sense of it being universal, as in, well, every human being on the planet has sensation within the body, and some of it is pleasant, some of it is unpleasant, but that experience is universal. And it's also deeply personal and intimate. It's but I agree with you that the Buddhist principles are very, very relevant when we're talking about chronic conditions, because there's a need to embrace and to be with, even breathe to learn to build that tolerance and capacity. And yet there's also that need to know, where is my true identity? And it's not here, it's not even in this body. Ultimately, we'll be letting go of this body. We'll be letting go of these sensations, which is all we've known. But there is something that's able to observe the sensations, which means I am not these sensations. I am something more.
And that is easy to say, and it's such a practice, because it can be so challenging to have any sense of transcendence when either our intrusive thoughts in the case of an anxiety disorder or depression, or our physical sensations in the case of a chronic condition, can be so intense and so intrusive and so overwhelming. And there's a trauma. I would like to name this as well. There can be a kind of trauma in living with a chronic condition. It's like a slow burn trauma. Trauma may be anything that overwhelms our coping resources. And chronic conditions can certainly do that. And we don't have to end up with post-traumatic stress disorder either. We can end up with post-traumatic growth. And so many of my clients, I'm pleased to report, do experience what we label post-traumatic growth. They say, I wouldn't wish this cancer, or I wouldn't wish this diabetes, or I wouldn't wish this MS, or whatever it is, or depression. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But after however many years and practicing acceptance and really learning to listen and really letting go and accepting my limitations, I have actually gained a lot as well. And I'm grateful. Like, I've even had clients say, I'm grateful for my chronic condition. Not that I'd wish it on anybody, but I've grown from it. And it's changed my perspective, and it's helped me transcend my ego in certain ways, because the ego does not like any of it. It doesn't want to have a bar of any of it, of course. So this really chafes up against our ego, our egoic mind, which says, I hate this, I don't want this, I can't do this, I'm bad, they're bad, everything's bad. The ego can be quite obstructive in that way. And there's nothing like a chronic condition to help us meet the dark side of our ego. And that can be an opportunity to really look inside.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm remembering my early experiences of yoga, when I had to learn about my own limitations. And I think for many, a yoga class can be that first opportunity to recognize, well, hang on a minute, I can't do what that person next to me is doing. And where other sports might, it is okay. Oh, darling, you're mute. Did you accidentally mute yourself?
How's that? Can you hear me?
I can, thank you. But yeah, I often find that a yoga session is the first time someone has really come into contact with their limitations. And I think other forms of exercise kind of brush over it. But yoga actually brings it front and center and helps us to recognize, okay, well, I can't balance with my leg up there, but I can balance with my leg down there. And that's an ongoing process that we need to revisit again and again and again until we're 95, like your grandmother. But the fact that there's an opportunity in that, not only to get creative and need to adapt, but also what's occurring to me is that there's a vulnerability in our limitations, and that is a strength. I'm thinking about a client yesterday who's had chronic rheumatoid arthritis, severe, for a couple of decades, and now diabetes. and really riddled with pain. She's lived with pain every day. But that there's a certain, there's a definite vulnerability in her that she's starting to own and even stand in and see that, see it as a strength. Perhaps that is the value of illness.
I believe that it is. Building our capacity for vulnerability is so important. It's so hard, but it's so important, because the alternative is that our sense of self and sense of safety gets smaller. It shrinks as we get older, and nobody really wants that. I think we've all met people who are a bit older and kind of small-minded and really kind of resistant or cynical or something. And I don't think we'd wish that on anybody. So really the challenge is to actually get more comfortable with vulnerability. And there's nothing like a chronic condition, as I said, to kind of really, really invite us to face the vulnerability of our own limitations, as you said. And yet, doing a practice like yoga or meditation or going to see a therapist and speaking your feelings and vulnerabilities, all of these practices are about slowly, with committed persistence, building some capacity, increasing our capacity. And it's such a celebration if you can suddenly, touch your toes when you couldn't before. And it's such a celebration for me as a therapist when my clients can speak their feelings to somebody in their life when they couldn't before. I have an invisible streamer button. When someone does something that anyone else would think was banal and I think is just wonderful, I press my invisible streamer button and then invisible streamers flow from the ceiling, because I want to celebrate any increase in capacity. And living with a chronic condition doesn't mean you're powerless most of the time, hence why I love the archetype of Frida Kahlo. She kept being resourceful and finding ways to do things that, would keep her busy, help contribute to the world. And she did. And so we don't want to go into denial, but we don't want to decide that we're powerless either. But until we face the reality and our vulnerability, I don't believe we can find our power to act. So there's such a process here. It's like doctors can look at a person with a chronic condition and go, okay, this is what you got to do. They don't see the psychological process, but I do. And it's huge. And I'd like to acknowledge that.
Yeah, as we're talking about vulnerability, and thank you for acknowledging it, that alone, just the matter of factness, the acknowledgement is enlightening. It lightens the experience to share it. And as we're talking about vulnerability, I'm reminded that there are many people who are actually have COVID right now. And so people who are in lockdown are going to be experiencing exactly what we're talking about in terms of limitations, compromise to their sense of competence or ability to contribute. And it also brings to mind man flu, and, that may well be, even in an acute phase, that resistance to vulnerability, that stoic, typically male, it's not always, but that stoic individual who almost refuses to be unwell, or won't let anybody know when they're unwell. It says to me that illness serves to connect us to our vulnerability, and not only that, but even our dependence, because we're all going to be dependent at some stage of our lives.
Yeah, exactly. And so we all need to face the possibility of deterioration. Over 70% of people die slowly. A lot of shows suggest that deaths occur suddenly through accidents or a diagnosis of something severe and they're dead a week later. But the research actually shows the vast majority of us will decline as we approach death. So actually this issue of chronic conditions and living with them and finding grace and finding acceptance and reframing so you stay in your humanity and your need for meaning, contribution, and connection. This is going to be relevant to all of us one day.
Yes.
And if we're not willing to be vulnerable, then there's some medical research that shows men are less likely to go to the doctor and therefore more likely to die of treatable diseases. And it's all to do with vulnerability. It's all to do with an unwillingness or an inability to be vulnerable enough to go to the doctor and say, hey, doc, I think there's something going on. I think I have a problem. So yeah, vulnerability very much comes into every stage of a chronic condition, from the very first glimmer right through to full acceptance. There's a lovely quote, comment here from Terry. Can you see that one there, Alexis?
I didn't. Oh, yes. Yeah. Commenting on, Terry's commenting on post-traumatic growth, which is it's a great term.
Yeah, and the cyclone, and the cyclone triggering the PTSD, but how it's also helped you accept your limitations. I mean, wise people accept their limitations, because what's the alternative? So well done.
Yeah, I like Katie's mention of acceptance and adaptation, which pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and it's a real process. Acceptance is one word, and it takes me 1 second to say the word, but the actual process of acceptance is a daily practice. You have bad days and good days, and it's such a process. But bit by bit by bit, we get closer towards acceptance, and it involves accepting all the stages of grief, all the emotions, the shame, the guilt, the fear, the anxiety, the anger, the uncertainty, the confusion. All of these feelings need to be acknowledged and accepted as fully human if we are to work towards a more accepting position, a more accepting sort of place within ourselves.
And I have to add to acceptance, because it's been so powerful for me, and I've shared it with that. To couple with acceptance, I think, is the term rehabilitation.
Yeah.
In accepting that I have a body that I'm going to have to take care of for the rest of my life.
Yep.
I need to accept that there's going to be constant rehabilitation, that I need to be in a communication with the symptoms of my body, the sensations of my body, and that can enable a more empowered experience. So while I do think acceptance is key, there's a difference. I'm thinking about it. A young woman recently who came to me for period pain, and we did some yoga together. And then when she came back, she said to me, it was just a bit easier to manage this time around. And I said, well, what was the difference? And she said the difference was that instead of lying on my back, I curled over and I got into a child pose. So the difference was one between the experience happening to her, or her being able to respond, actively take some step to work with her body. So rather than, again, like the body being the enemy, it was, okay, I'm choosing now to work with you. And yoga has taught me that that's a constant and never-ending communication, and it is towards rehabilitation, moving toward balance as best we can, again and again and again.
Yeah,
thoughts?
I agree. Yeah, no, it reminds me of the difference between, having your issues or your issues having you. There's this sort of passivity of like, oh, my body's doing this thing to me, or I can hold it. I can hold this. I can contain this. It's not easy, and I don't like it, and I don't have to like it, but I can hold it gently and with compassion. I can contain this. I can be with it and tolerate it. That's a different relationship. And yeah, there's many ways that we can use our body and our mind to do this practice. So yeah, I agree with you.
And just on that, because I'm aware of time, but you know, I have found that there are certain themes that underlie all, well, they're common to all chronic conditions. And this is supported by Yabor Mate. You know, he actually believes that all chronic conditions stem back to childhood trauma. And he has quite a body of evidence to show that link. But a teacher of mine, Simon Bourg-Olivier, a yoga teacher, says that he believes that all chronic illness stems back to sympathetic dominance, the sympathetic nervous system being in a hyper state. And I would have to say that in 20 or more years as a clinician, stress is underlying chronic conditions. And
or it makes it, like I've worked with people who've had injury, and the injury is at a physical level, some damage to the body, but the threat physiology, which is what I've come to call it, just the physiology of the threat response, I think over many years can create a chronic condition, or a chronic condition can happen and then the threat physiology makes it worse.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we know, I mean, physios talk about the fear, tension, pain cycle. The tension causes the pain. So I did want to just mention that, you know, there's always ways to work at the level of stress and to shift toward a more relaxed state of nervous system. And equally, there's always ways to work on dampening our inflammation. And there's a lot of research to suggest that both inflammation and disturbance to the microbiome is, again, common to almost all chronic conditions. So I just wanted to add that there's always something that we can do alongside acceptance, and that little bit of engagement, empowerment, I think makes the difference psychologically as well.
Empowerment. And I just want to answer one more question before we finish up. Louisa has asked, how do we find acceptance for our limitations in a society that only rewards productivity? And I mean, we can't change society, but we can find empowerment in our own little piece of the world, in our lives. I mean, we do what we can. That's true for all of us. And there is a sadness if we can't do nearly as much as we'd like to, but all of us do have limitations. And look, I've even worked with CEOs who've burned out, gone bankrupt, and suddenly had to face their own chronic conditions, their own limitations. So none of us is immune in the end to this. I guess I like to be a rebel and subvert the expectations of society and excavate my own psyche for the unconscious expectations so that I can challenge them and they no longer disempower me by having power over me. So I want to sort of connect to what you just said, Alexis, which is we can find our agency. We aren't completely powerless. We never don't have choice. And so it's in that sphere of control and choice that we need to live and try and stay there. That's the only answer, really. Worrying about things outside of our control, like society, will just send anybody crazy.
That's right. And come and hang with our community where we value contribution in all its many forms. Including presence
and community and support.
Yes, support.
Okay. So could you put a link to our March retreat in the comments later on, please?
Yes, I'll do that straight away. I'll also put a link to our community page where you can let us know your story. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. It's it's relevant for everybody, this topic. So please forward it on if you know friends or family that have chronic conditions that you feel may benefit from hearing our discussion today. And thank you, Dr. Rachel. Always very valuable to hear your voice. And I look forward to seeing you same time, same place.
Likewise. Yes, good. Okay, thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.